Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is Thursday, March 5, 2026.
And we are speaking to you at a genuinely pivotal moment in modern history. I mean, this is an absolute game changer. We are looking at a world teetering on a dual precipice right now.
Yeah.
On one side, we have this catastrophic, multi-front geopolitical war raging in the Middle East that is actively threatening to choke the entire global economy. And happening concurrently, almost unbelievably, is the explosive unsealing of the Epstein deposition transcripts, which are currently shaking the highest levels of global power. The ground is literally shifting under our feet on two entirely different fronts.
We really have to unpack this because that is exactly our mission for you, the listener, today. Sure. We're going to connect the dots between the kinetic warfare happening overseas and the covert elite warfare happening right now in the courtrooms. We are bringing you the financial metrics, the newly unsealed transcripts, and the absolute best geopolitical and legal analysis available. We are cutting through the spin to find the hidden truths that other broadcasts are simply missing.
But before we dive into the documentation, I need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener. Today's broadcast will cover highly politically charged, deeply disturbing allegations regarding Donald Trump, Bill and Hillary Clinton, the United States military apparatus, and various foreign governments.
Yes, very important to state.
It is crucial to state that neither of us sitting at this desk is endorsing these viewpoints, nor are we taking any political sides. Our sole directive is to impartially report the data, synthesize the unsealed transcripts, and analyze the expert reporting to understand what the documentation actually reveals.
That is the foundation we operate from. So let's start by looking at the kinetic side of this dual crisis.
Yeah.
The sheer scale of the military engagement we are witnessing in the Middle East right now is, it's staggering.
It's unprecedented.
We are talking about metrics that require some context to fully grasp. In just a matter of days, the region has seen 5,000 airstrikes launched by Israel and 2,000 by the United States.
Right.
The U.S. military has officially designated this Operation Epic Fury. And the statements coming from officials like Pete Hegseth assert that the U.S. is winning decisively. But I want to pause on that narrative, because when we examine the financial burn rate, a very different picture emerges.
A completely different reality.
The United States has already expended $918 million in weapons and equipment. And according to the logistical reporting, that figure is projected to inflate to $979 million almost immediately.
Just to replace the munitions that have already been fired.
Exactly.
And that financial burn rate is exactly why analysts are questioning the whole decisive victory framework. When you measure military success, you have to look beyond just the raw number of strikes and examine the strategic reality on the ground.
Which is grim.
Very. According to the rigorous analysis by Professor Jiang and the geopolitical forecasting of Alexander Mercouris, Iran has successfully achieved one of its primary asymmetric goals, which is effectively closing the Strait of Hormuz.
Wow.
And the economic indicators reflect immediate, profound panic. Brent crude has spiked 14.4% to $80.87 per barrel. West Texas Intermediate, the U.S. benchmark, is up 13.3% to $73.85.
That's a massive jump.
This is not just a regional disruption. It is the establishment of an active economic chokehold.
And to understand the gravity of that chokehold, we have to look at the regional production halts. Iraq, which is a massive global supplier, has already been forced to halt the production of 3 million barrels a day.
Right, because the ships can't move.
Exactly. They essentially had to cap production from two different massive oil fields because the tankers are physically unable to move through the Gulf. And perhaps even more critical for the European market is the situation in Qatar.
Oh, the LNG.
Right. Qatar's liquid natural gas, their LNG exports, which constitute a vast majority of the world's available LNG supply, have come to a complete grinding halt.
And the mechanics of how this chokehold operates are fascinating because it's not purely a physical blockade of ships. It is largely driven by the financial infrastructure of global shipping.
The insurance side of things?
Precisely. Maritime insurers, specifically syndicates within Lloyd's of London, have essentially canceled standard war risk coverage for that entire region. If a commercial entity wants to move a tanker through the strait right now, they are looking at astronomical premiums,
How high are we talking?
often quoted between $500,000 and $600,000 just for a single transit into the Gulf, assuming they can even secure a policy at all. From a risk assessment perspective, most captains and shipping conglomerates are simply refusing to sail.
You can't blame them.
Furthermore, LNG contracts are complex and negotiated months, sometimes years in advance. European nations cannot just pivot and replace Qatari LNG overnight by calling up alternative suppliers.
They don't have the infrastructure for that pivot.
Exactly. According to analysis from major financial institutions like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, if this closure lasts longer than 25 days, Europe faces a severe recession. They lack the structural energy reserves, particularly after the systematic weaning off of Russian gas over the past few years.
But wait, I want to explore that 25-day horizon. We have seen oil spikes and regional conflicts before. Have European energy markets not built in some level of redundancy? Because President Trump has publicly stated that the U.S. Navy will provide escorts and that the U.S. government will step in to underwrite the marine insurance to get these tankers moving again.
He has.
He is actively assuring the global markets that the Navy will clear the transit paths.
That is the political solution being offered, yes. But we have to evaluate its tactical viability. If we look at the analysis by former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, he argues vehemently that this plan is operationally flawed. Johnson details the geography of the Strait of Hormuz. It is incredibly narrow, with shipping lanes that force vessels dangerously close to the Iranian coastline. He argues that any U.S. naval ships entering that strait to escort slow-moving, highly explosive commercial tankers would be highly vulnerable.
Sitting ducks, essentially.
His exact implication. According to his assessment, sending them in invites asymmetric strikes from anti-ship missiles and fast attack craft stationed along the coast. It is a gesture designed to reassure financial markets, but from a naval warfare perspective, it carries catastrophic risk.
And what about the broader global impact?
We must also consider the geopolitical analysis by Arnaud Bétard regarding China. While Western economies panic over energy scarcity, Bétard points out that China is currently 84% self-sufficient in energy.
84%?
Yes, utilizing a combination of domestic coal, oil reserves, and an expanding nuclear power grid. They are structurally positioned to weather this specific supply shock far better than the European allies the United States relies upon.
Which makes the tactical reality in the skies even more critical to understand. Let's examine the deployment strategies regarding air superiority versus air defense. The United States has moved significant assets into the theater. We are looking at B-2 stealth bombers and the widespread deployment of fifth-generation F-35s.
Top-of-the-line hardware.
Originally, these advanced fighters were stationed relatively close to the potential conflict zones, specifically at the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia and the Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. But Iran has responded to the initial strikes with their own campaign, designated Operation True Promise 4.
Yes, and specifically, we need to analyze waves 14 and 17 of that operation. The targeting strategy appears highly methodical. Rather than random retaliation, the reporting indicates they have systematically targeted the operational nervous system of the U.S. military presence in the region.
Taking out the eyes and ears.
Exactly. They have struck vital Allied bases, including the critical Al Udeid radar facility in Qatar, which provides essential early warning detection and airspace management for the entire region. They have also targeted U.S. facilities in Erbil, located in Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq.
And the fallout from those strikes.
The strategic consequence is that they are forcing the U.S. to relocate these advanced F-35s to bases much further away from the operational theater. This dramatically complicates logistics, meaning these jets now require a minimum of 2 to 3 mid-air refueling stops just to reach a position where they can launch their payloads.
That logistical strain brings us to a highly debated piece of data regarding the downed U.S. F-15 Eagles over Kuwait.
Right. This is a massive point of contention.
The Pentagon's explanation for this incident is that 3 emerging reports suggest potentially a 4th F-15s were shot down due to Kuwaiti-friendly fire. The stated reason is that the IFF transponders, the Identify Friend or Foe systems, failed on these advanced jets simultaneously, leading Kuwaiti air defenses to mistake them for hostile targets.
Which is quite a claim.
It really is. IFF systems have multiple layers of redundancy. Are we really supposed to accept that several advanced fighter jets suffered simultaneous, catastrophic failures of their most basic identification systems?
That is precisely the question military analysts like Andrei Martynov and Larry Johnson are raising. When you apply statistical analysis to that official explanation, it faces severe credibility issues.
It's just math at that point.
Exactly. The probability of multiple redundant IFF transponders on elite F-15s failing sequentially, resulting in an allied nation shooting down several American jets, is mathematically negligible. Martynov's analysis suggests a very different reality.
Which is?
That Iranian air defenses, whether utilizing their Russian-provided S-300 PMU-2 systems or their indigenous variants like the HQ-9 and the 40M-6 missiles, are effectively engaging American aircraft.
Meaning they actually shot them down.
The implication is that attributing the losses to a highly improbable technical failure in friendly fire avoids the strategic embarrassment of admitting a peer adversary is capable of piercing American air superiority.
And the challenge isn't just about offensive air capabilities. It is deeply tied to the defensive shield. We're tracking a severe depletion of the U.S. interceptor missile inventory.
The defensive umbrella.
Right. We're talking about the systems that protect these bases. The high-altitude threaded systems meant for ballistic missiles, the Patriot batteries, and the naval SM-2, SM-3, and SM-6 interceptors. According to the detailed logistical analysis by Matthew Ho and former weapons inspector Scott Ritter, the United States is rapidly consuming these highly complex, expensive defensive munitions.
It's an economic mismatch.
Completely. We are essentially firing multi-million-dollar interceptors to destroy incoming Iranian drones that cost approximately $50,000 and operate on commercially available components like Raspberry Pi computers.
It is an asymmetric mathematical equation that heavily disadvantages the defense. You are matching an exquisite, low-inventory, high-cost defensive system against a cheap, high-volume, easily replaceable offensive capability.
And we can't just build more SM-6s overnight.
Not at all. Ritter and Ho emphasize that the industrial production rates for interceptors like the SM-6 are painstakingly slow. You cannot simply surge production of a sophisticated missile. The critical question becomes, what happens when the interceptor inventory is exhausted?
That's vulnerability.
It leaves U.S. installations and regional allies like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Jordan exposed to Iran's extensive network of underground ballistic missile silos. There are even reports circulating of Iranian forces utilizing decoys painting silhouettes of obsolete F-14s on the tarmac to trick U.S. targeting systems into expending million-dollar JDAM munitions on empty concrete.
That's brilliant but terrifying.
Analysts point out that this reveals a massive strategic vulnerability in U.S. tactical planning.
It's fascinating how this strategy in the Middle East seems to be shifting as the math in the air becomes unsustainable. Because as the air war stalls and munitions deplete, the focus appears to be moving to the ground.
The proxy war.
Yes. According to deeply sourced reports from Natasha Bertrand, the CIA is actively working to arm Kurdish rebel forces. Specifically, groups like the KDPI and Jakhto initiate a ground uprising inside Iran. We have reporting indicating that President Trump personally held calls with prominent Kurdish leaders, Barzani and Talabani, to coordinate this logistical effort.
When we examine the historical precedent of this strategy, utilizing ethnic minority populations to destabilize a sovereign nation of roughly 90 million people, the geopolitical implications are vast.
It rarely stays contained.
According to the analysis by geopolitical scholar Glenn Deason and former CIA case officer Phil Giraldi, this mirrors the proxy tactics utilized in Syria and Iraq, as well as operations dating back to the 1980s. Giraldi points out that leveraging ethnic divisions to foment internal conflict is a well-documented intelligence strategy.
But does it work?
The historical record indicates these operations rarely result in a neat democratic transition. They frequently lead to prolonged, fragmented conflict.
And we cannot discuss arming Kurdish militias without looking at the broader regional map. How does a NATO ally like Turkey react to this?
Not well.
Turkey views these specific Kurdish armed groups as existential security threats and actively designates them as terrorist organizations.
It introduces immediate and profound geopolitical friction. Turkey has historically demonstrated that it will not tolerate a heavily armed U.S.-backed Kurdish militia operating near its borders, particularly if those groups hold aspirations of carving out an independent state or a buffer zone.
It could fracture the alliance.
This strategy directly threatens the cohesion of the NATO alliance in that specific theater. Analysts suggest this points to a larger issue of policy desperation, where tactical decisions are being made without a clear, cohesive endgame.
Let's examine that larger policy issue, because the public justifications for the broader conflict have been notably inconsistent. Florida Senator Marco Rubio recently provided shifting explanations on the record.
The narrative changed very quickly.
Initially, he asserted the U.S. had to attack Iran preemptively due to an imminent threat. Then he pivoted, stating that Israel was planning to strike Iran regardless, and because the U.S. intelligence community knew Iran would likely retaliate against American troops in the region, the U.S. was essentially forced to join Israel's operational timeline to protect its own assets.
That is a remarkable admission regarding the mechanics of foreign policy. It suggests that U.S. military engagement was dictated by the timeline of another nation. And when evaluating the strategic objective of these strikes, we have to look at the civilian impact.
The collateral damage.
Reports indicate that 168 Iranian schoolgirls were killed in recent collateral damage incidents. From a strategic perspective, analysts continually note that bombing civilian infrastructure rarely sparks a pro-American uprising.
It usually does the opposite.
Historically, it tends to harden national defiance and unite a disparate population against an external force. The assumption that arming regional insurgents while simultaneously conducting aerial bombardments will yield a clean regime change is viewed by many military historians as a profound miscalculation.
This entire kinetic strategy relies heavily on proxy networks and operating in the shadows. And speaking of shadow networks, that concept translates perfectly to the domestic revelations we are seeing right now with the unsealing of the Jeffrey Epstein deposition transcripts.
The pivot from international to domestic is jarring but necessary.
While international focus is on the skies over Tehran, we have a massive legal and political story unfolding domestically. Let's start by looking at the documentation regarding the Clintons. We have the actual unsealed transcripts of Bill Clinton being deposed by Representative Nancy Mace. And the legal strategy Mace employed during this exchange is highly revealing.
It is a fascinating study in legal deposition tactics. Representative Mace directly confronted former President Clinton with witness testimony gathered from the broader Epstein investigation.
She didn't hold back.
She specifically asked him to explain why Jeffrey Epstein was quoted by witnesses as saying Clinton liked them young.
And Clinton's initial response, according to the transcript, was a standard denial of having any interest in underage girls. But Mace didn't stop there. She clarified her terminology, pointing out that she didn't use the word underage. She specifically used the word young.
A critical legal distinction.
And then she boxed him in with a very specific follow-up regarding the definition of that word. She asked him point blank, is an intern young? Was Monica Lewinsky young?
It was a precise legal maneuver designed to strip away his plausible deniability regarding his behavioral history and preferences. But the value of these transcripts extends far beyond rhetorical maneuvering. They delve into the logistical data, specifically the flight logs.
The Lolita Express records.
Yes. The documentation confirms that Bill Clinton flew on Epstein's customized Boeing 727 at least 26 times. The stated purpose for these flights was often categorized as Clinton Foundation charitable work, but the destinations recorded in the logs include Hong Kong, Siberia, Brunei, and various locations across Africa.
The deposition gets incredibly granular about those specific trips. The transcript shows he was questioned extensively about his interactions with Virginia Giuffre, who was previously testified to seeing Clinton on Epstein's private island, a claim Clinton adamantly denied under oath.
Right.
But the questioning also introduced a specific individual named Shante Davies. Representative Mace asked if he received a massage from her during a 2002 trip to Africa, and the transcript shows Clinton actually admitting that he did receive a neck rub while sitting up, though he maintained he was entirely unaware if she or anyone else on that specific trip was underage at the time.
That detail is significant, but where the transcripts truly expand our understanding of these networks is when Clinton was pressed on his actual relationship with Jeffrey Epstein himself.
This is where the structural connections come in.
Bill Clinton testified under oath that his primary relationship was not actually with Epstein, but rather with Ghislaine Maxwell. And the justification he provided for that relationship is crucial. Clinton stated that Maxwell was very good friends with Evelyn Rothschild and his wife, Lynn Rothschild, whom Clinton knew and was in regular communication with.
That's a remarkable detail because it anchors Epstein and Maxwell not just as rogue operators, but to a deeply established financial dynasty.
Exactly. Clinton explicitly anchored his social connection to Epstein's orbit through the Rothschild family. And what makes this legally compelling is that this dynamic is corroborated elsewhere in the newly unsealed documents.
Les Wexner's testimony.
Correct. The transcripts also include the deposition of billionaire retail magnate Les Wexner, who served as Epstein's primary financial backer for decades. Wexner's testimony corroborated this exact social architecture, explicitly linking Epstein's early financial operations and his elevation into high society to his ties with the Rothschilds.
It changes the whole narrative.
This shifts the analytical framework. It suggests we are not merely looking at a lone, wealthy predator, but a man who was strategically operating within an established intergenerational financial network.
And the depositions extended to Hillary Clinton as well. The transcripts detail her questioning, led by Representative Lauren Boebert. According to the notes and summaries of that exchange, Hillary Clinton's usually polished demeanor noticeably fractured when Boebert aggressively questioned her regarding the internet conspiracy theory known as frazzled drip.
It is described in the record as a deeply contentious, hostile exchange.
It really highlights the tension in that room.
When you synthesize all of these depositions, former presidents, secretaries of state, and billionaires all being forced to explain their logistical and financial ties to a convicted human trafficker, it forces a broader analytical question. Analysts are asking if we are looking at the mechanics of an international blackmail ring.
The ultimate leverage.
The concern is whether the global political elite is intrinsically compromised by these networks, which appear designed to capture and exert influence over the apex of Western political power.
And it's vital to recognize that this insulation and compromise isn't confined to one side of the political aisle. We have to examine the documentation regarding Donald Trump in these Epstein files, because the data here is equally significant, and it involves current actions by the Department of Justice.
This is a major legal showdown.
According to statements entered into the record by California Representative Robert Garcia, the DOJ is currently withholding FBI interview files dating back to 1983. These files detail interviews with a survivor who was 13 years old at the time, who accused Donald Trump of horrific crimes.
The legal framework surrounding the withholding of these documents is what requires our attention. Following the myriad scandals surrounding Epstein's death and the handling of his case, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act,
a law specifically meant to stop cover-ups.
The statutory language of this act is explicitly designed to prevent institutional protection of public figures. The law strictly forbids the Department of Justice from withholding or redacting investigative files simply because the contents may be politically embarrassing to powerful individuals.
And Garcia is calling them out on it.
Representative Garcia argues that by withholding these specific 1983 FBI interviews that were reportedly conducted 4 separate times, indicating a level of credibility to the investigators at the time, the DOJ is operating in direct violation of the Transparency Act.
To understand the context of these allegations, we have to look at the documented history between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. For years, the public narrative presented by Trump's camp was that he took a moral stand, supposedly banning Epstein from his Mar-a-Lago club after Epstein allegedly poached underage staff members.
That was the accepted story.
But when you look at the transcripts and the financial documentation, a very different timeline emerges. It points toward a bitter real estate dispute rather than a moral crusade.
The financial records clarify the nature of their falling out. The data details a massive dispute over a highly coveted property in Palm Beach. The records indicate that Epstein had placed a bid of $36 million for the estate.
And then Trump stepped in.
Trump, allegedly utilizing his access to Epstein's financial intentions, went behind his back and undercut him with a $41 million bid, successfully securing the property. Analyzing this data suggests the rupture in their relationship was fundamentally a billionaire's brawl over prime real estate, rather than an ideological severing of ties over the treatment of vulnerable individuals.
What stands out to me from a communications perspective is Trump's current reaction to this unsealing. Donald Trump is a figure who utilizes his platforms to comment on virtually every news cycle, from geopolitical events to the ratings of late-night television.
He's never quiet.
Yet, regarding the unsealing of these highly anticipated documents that implicate his political rivals as well as himself, he has maintained complete silence. He has not mentioned the word Epstein in his recent public appearances or lengthy rally speeches.
That strategic silence is highly notable to political analysts. It suggests an awareness of severe vulnerability, and we are seeing this strategy impact his political coalition. Prominent commentators within his own base, such as Nick Fuentes, are publicly criticizing the administration's handling of this issue.
There's definitely friction there.
Fuentes has explicitly argued that the Epstein scandal represents Donald Trump's Achilles heel. When fervent supporters begin to publicly question whether the DOJ is running interference to hide 1983 FBI interviews, the political armor of being an anti-establishment outsider begins to face serious internal pressure.
That level of institutional protection is what allows these networks to build parallel infrastructures. And we see that most clearly in the final segment of our analysis today. We have to examine the investigative report filed by senior writer E.J. Dixon regarding Jeffrey Epstein's medical machinery.
The industrialization of abuse.
Exactly. This wasn't just a loose collection of associates. The documentation reveals that Epstein employed a vast, highly organized network of prominent New York gynecologists.
Dixon's investigation of the internal emails reveals the clinical, systematic nature of this operation. Epstein utilized doctors such as Dr. Alexander Schiff and Dr. Stephen Victor to treat the young women he trafficked, many of whom were brought into the United States from vulnerable economic situations in Eastern Europe and Russia.
Treating them like assets.
The emails show Epstein's assistants were constantly coordinating what he referred to in writing as wellness tests. It demonstrates how he codified and institutionalized the medical maintenance of his victims, primarily to protect his own sexual health and ensure the continuity of his trafficking network.
The documentation also highlights a severe cognitive dissonance in Epstein's personal life. In high society, Epstein cultivated the image of a severe germaphobe. He was known for refusing to shake hands, insisting on awkward elbow bumps instead.
It was a well-known quirk of his.
Yet the unsealed medical records expose a vastly different reality behind closed doors. The actual laboratory data shows that this supposed germaphobe tested positive for chlamydia in 2015 and tested positive for gonorrhea in both 2016 and 2018. The records also show he was highly knowledgeable about obscure infections like ureaplasma.
It completely dismantles the public persona he projected. But the sociological insight here is how extreme wealth can subvert established professional ethics. This wasn't a case of doctors occasionally performing routine checkups. The documentation shows they were financially tethered to the operation.
The financial leverage was baked in.
Dixon's reporting highlights a specific, documented arrangement with Dr. Stephen Victor. According to the financial records, Epstein provided Dr. Victor with a massive loan to help capitalize a cosmeceuticals business. In exchange for this capital injection, Dr. Victor allegedly agreed to provide free, off-the-books medical treatments for the girls Epstein was trafficking.
It was essentially a barter system operating within the elite medical community. Funding for a cosmetics company was exchanged for treating sexually transmitted diseases in trafficked girls. And the records indicate they eventually had a bitter financial dispute over this exact arrangement.
That is what the reporting indicates. And perhaps the most revealing detail from Dixon's extensive review of these thousands of emails comes from an exchange involving Epstein's brother.
This part is chilling.
In a casual, entirely mundane email thread, Epstein's brother asks for the name of the New York doctor that Epstein, quote, used to send your victims to. He explicitly uses the word victims.
Not guests, not friends.
Yeah.
Victims.
This piece of documentation strongly suggests that the predatory nature of this operation was not a closely guarded secret. It was a casually accepted reality within his immediate circle. They utilized their immense wealth to build an entire parallel medical supply chain to service a human trafficking ring, and it operated seamlessly within the Manhattan elite.
Which points to a much larger issue.
It does. This brings us to the ultimate takeaway that you, the listener, need to consider as you watch these events unfold. What we are analyzing today across both of these seemingly disparate stories is a systemic crisis of accountability across every spectrum of power.
From the battlefield to the courtroom.
On the geopolitical front, we see the initiation of an open-ended, massively expensive military campaign in the Middle East, a conflict launched with shifting objectives and opaque exit strategies, risking severe disruptions to the global energy market, all while being shielded by classified briefings and political rhetoric.
And domestically, it's the same pattern of insulation.
Exactly. Simultaneously, on the domestic front, we see the extreme insulation of the global elite. We have billionaires, former presidents, and current leaders shielded by a legal apparatus that appears to selectively withhold evidence to prevent political embarrassment. Whether we are examining the kinetic warfare of Operation Epic Fury or the covert legal maneuvering within the Epstein files, the underlying theme is that the systems of global power are increasingly operating in the shadows, insulated from the consequences of their actions.
Which leaves you with a final, lingering question to explore on your own. Right now, the entire world's attention is utterly consumed by skyrocketing gas prices, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the depletion of defensive munitions, and a potential European recession.
It's deafening.
But as you watch the military deployments and the chaos dominate the headlines, we have to ask, is the overwhelming noise of this unprecedented global war serving as the ultimate, perfectly timed smokescreen? Is the threat of a wider conflict capturing the public's bandwidth just long enough to bury the domestic revelations of the Epstein transcripts, ensuring that the architects of those shadow networks remain untouched?
It's a question we all need to be asking.
If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.